Where did that come from? Hey everybody, this is Pastor Justin Walker with The Whole Truth. We're going through the entire Bible from Genesis all the way to Revelation, and I want you to come along with me. So subscribe to the channel, follow the page, leave your likes and your comments, share the video. You know how to do those social media things, but most importantly, grab a Bible, turn it open to Genesis and the 14th chapter and the 18th verse. Now, I don't have time right now to go over this entire story with you. Just very briefly, that Abram had just won a battle against 5 kings. Most importantly, this guy named Chedorlaomer, and Abram won, and he got his nephew who had been kidnapped or taken captive. He got him back. Okay, so Abram just won this battle, and now he's got his nephew back. And pick up in the story. This is Genesis chapter 14 and verse 18. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of the Most High God, and he blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hands." And he gave him a tithe of all. This guy, Melchizedek, where did he come from? Think about this. We've had Sodom. We've had the story of Sodom going into battle with the other kings. These 5 kings went into battle against these 4 kings. We've seen about Lot. All of a sudden, this guy just kind of like jumps onto the scene. Now, of all the other important people in the Bible, you'll notice that it was this guy begat this guy, and then this guy begat this guy. This guy had this son, and then that son had another son. Right? There's been this person and then a son. And we go all the way back to Adam, and you get Adam, and he lived so many years, and he died. And you get Seth, and he lived so many years, and he died. You get this guy, Melchizedek. He comes out of nowhere, and we learn very little about him here. All we can see here is that his name is Melchizedek. He is the king of Salem. He brought out bread and wine, and he blessed Abram and blessed God. That's what we can see of this guy named Melchizedek. But yet the Bible has some pretty important things to say about Melchizedek. I'm not going to have you turn to this one, but one of those is in Psalm chapter 110. And then another is in Hebrews chapter 7. And we will turn to that one in Hebrews chapter 7. So if you want to get your Bible ready, go over to Hebrews chapter 7. Melchizedek he represents something that happens in the Bible. And I want you to get ready for this one, because this is going to come up a lot through the Old Testament. Are you ready for this? Melchizedek is a type of Christ. Melchizedek is a type of Christ. He represents a picture. He's picturing what Christ will do. That's what a type is. A type of Christ is something or someone that represents Jesus in some way, or pictures Jesus. That's probably a better way to word it. Someone or something that pictures Jesus. What will Jesus do, or who will Jesus be? And we see a picture of that in Old Testament characters and places and sacrifices and things. And here's one such example. His name is Melchizedek. Now, how is Melchizedek a type of Christ? You say, Justin, I don't get it. Pastor, I hear what you're saying with your mouth, but I don't get it. Then Melchizedek, the king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of the Most High, and he blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be the God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hands." Where does that picture Christ? Well, it pictures Christ in several ways, and to understand those, let's turn to Hebrews and the 7th chapter. Look at Hebrews and chapter 7, and look down with me at the first verse and read this with me. "For Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham, returning from the slaughter of the kings, and blessed him, to whom also Abraham gave a tenth of all," first being translated king of righteousness, and then also king of Salem, meaning king of peace. "Without father, without mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days, nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, remains a priest continually." Whoa, did you catch it? What we just read, the writer of Hebrews just said to us that Melchizedek, he named Melchizedek. He came out, he's the priest of the Most High, and he came out to Abram. Abraham, the story we just read from Genesis 14, starting in verse 18. So this guy comes out and he is picturing Christ. Well, how does the writer of Hebrews say that he pictures Christ? Well, one way is that he is the King of righteousness. That is literally what his name means. He is the King of righteousness. Well, also, not only is he the King of righteousness, and Jesus, who is our righteousness, he is righteousness made into flesh, and he makes us righteousness. He who knew no sin became sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. You see, we have been made righteous in Jesus Christ. Melchizedek pictured that. He is the King of righteousness. It also says that he's the King of Salem. Interestingly enough, you say, what point does that make? Well, Salem, if you were to add a few letters to the beginning of it, you would know what Salem becomes later, or that area of Salem later becomes Jerusalem. Jerusalem. And that is truly the holy city. That's the city that God has named as his capital city, Jerusalem. And here we see that this is the King of Salem. That's Melchizedek, the King of Salem. Well, I'll give you a couple of other ways as well. Hebrews said that he didn't have a father, he didn't have a mother, he didn't have a beginning of days, he didn't have an ending of days. Now, that doesn't mean that Melchizedek was eternal. Some people would try to say that Melchizedek was a pre-incarnate Christ. I don't believe that. I don't think there's scriptural basis for that, because in Hebrews it says that he became, if I read that last part again, that he was made like the Son of God. He is not the Son of God, but he was made like the Son of God. Okay, so in other words, he's picturing for us the Son of God. Well, we know that in some ways that Christ is in the priesthood of Aaron, right? We know Aaron, that's going to come up later in the Bible. Maybe you don't know the Bible, and I don't mean to skip ahead on you. But there's this guy named Aaron, and he's the priest, and all the other priests of the Old Testament have to be in his line. And they make sacrifices, and in some ways, Christ is in that line. But in another way, Melchizedek pictures Christ, not the Christ who has a genealogy, like what we see in Matthew or in Luke, but Christ who has no genealogy. In other words, Christ who has no beginning, Christ who has no end. He is the Alpha and the Omega. We read in John chapter 1 that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and there is nothing that was made that was not made by him. He made everything. All things that were made are made by him. That's John chapter 1. You could go read that for yourself. You see, Christ has no beginning. He has no end. And yes, he was born on this earth, but before that, he ever was. He is eternal. And so Melchizedek jumps on the scene, and we don't read this guy. We don't know. Some people, I read one commentator who said that Melchizedek is in the line of Seth. Well, you don't know that because we don't read that Melchizedek is in the line of Seth. And that's what we have here, is a picture of Christ. How else does Melchizedek picture Christ? Well, what did he come out bringing? Did you notice that Melchizedek came out bringing, he brought bread and he brought wine with him. And you remember that Jesus, that night at the Last Supper, that's what Jesus did. He pulled out the bread and he broke it. And he said, "This is my body, which is broken for you." And you remember that Jesus took the cup that night and he blessed it. He gave thanks. And then he said, "This is the cup of the new covenant. This is the blood of the new covenant." And remember, he said, "Drink ye all of it." And then he said this, "As often as you do this, do it in remembrance of me." Every time we take the bread and the wine, every time we take the bread and the juice in church, we are remembering Christ and what he did until he comes. How Christ's body was bruised and broken for us, that by his stripes we are healed, and that his blood was shed for us. The precious blood of Christ was shed for us. And so Melchizedek came out and he brought bread and he brought wine, pictured the death of Christ. Pictured the death of Christ all throughout history, all throughout the Bible, all throughout the scriptures. We've always had a memory of Melchizedek bringing out the bread and the wine. "This do in remembrance of me." You see, Melchizedek pictured Christ. and what Christ would be. Now, here's this interesting part that Melchizedek comes out, and when Melchizedek comes out and he brings the bread and the wine, Abram recognizes that something is happening, because we read in verse 20 that, and he gave him a tithe of all. Abram paid a tithe. He gave a tithe, a tenth. He gave an offering to God. After he won the battle, he made an offering to the Lord. And so he was worshiping God. Melchizedek came out with the bread and the wine, and Abram makes an offering to the Lord, and he pays the tithe. Now, interestingly enough, we get into verse 22. But Abram said to the, verse 21. I've started to read the wrong thing again. Verse 21. Now the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the persons and take the goods for yourself. The king of Sodom now makes an offer. So the king Melchizedek, the king of Salem, he comes out and they worship God together, Abram and Melchizedek. But then the king of Sodom says, well, let me bless you. Here, you take all the possessions. You take all the goods. Just let me have the people back. And that would have been in accordance with the law of that day. There are even ancient laws that we can read that would recognize that as a typical practice of the day. But Abram said, no. Look what Abram says in verse 22. Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand to God. In other words, an oath. I've raised my hand to the Lord God Most High, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will take nothing from a thread to a sandal strap, and that I will not take anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich. Verse 24, except only what the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men who went with me, Anar, Eshcol, Mamre, let them take their portion. Abram says, hey, let these guys, these are Amalekite guys, let them take their portion. But for me, no, I don't want anything. I don't even want a thread or a strap for a sandal. I don't want anything from you, king of Sodom. Not that he's trying to be rude to the king of Sodom, but he is saying, I don't want you to be able to say that you made me rich. I want everyone to know that it was God who blessed me. And may we end with that today. What a wonderful lesson to see, not to mingle the blessings of God with the temptations of the world. I'm sure that was a great temptation. You understand that these 4 kings just defeated these 5 kings and took Lot and his possessions. They took all the king's possessions. They took all the people's possessions. There was a lot of stuff, a lot of cattle, a lot of servants, a lot of things that the king Chedorlaomer had. When Sodom got the people back, he got all their stuff back. They're bringing all this stuff back into the land of Sodom. And he says to Abram, you can have it all. Take it all. And Abram says, no, I made an oath to the Lord that I wouldn't take anything, because I don't want you to say that you made me rich. The one taking care of me is God. It's not a person. It's not a thing. It's not some thing that I did, some battle that I won. Can we put it in modern day terms? It's not some investment that you made. It's not some invention that you had. It's not something you've done. Rather, it's what God has done for you. And Abram wanted everyone to see what God had done for him. And he didn't want the blessing of God to get mingled with the temptations of the world. Okay, everybody, I hope that you have a great night, and I will see you tomorrow with another video. We'll have Genesis chapter 15 and God's covenant with Abram. So I'll see you then.